One thing I love about a lot of your movies is there's very rarely a lot of judgment reserved for the characters on the part of the storyteller. You could have turned the tables on Bernice at any time and got her in trouble.
Yeah, and the nice thing is we don't operate under the old code. You know, in the 50s and as late as the 60s, there was still this code where bad people had to be, their just desserts had to be delivered before the credits came up. And sometimes it really bent the story out of shape, and the filmmakers were very obviously, okay, folks, sorry, but I got to do this.
Right.
You know, my favorite example is the Bad Seed.
Oh,
where in the play, the little girl's mom commits suicide. In the movie, there's an offstage gunshot. Then we hear she wounded herself. And then she walks out on the end of a pier in a bolt of lightning. And not just that, then they introduce the cast and they pretend to spank the little girl. So, it was just a movie. They were so afraid.
And it's such a creepy film before that, too.
And so, see it and then don't watch the last, 8 minutes of it.
But people were able to deal with some heavy moral issues in that. One film I was thinking about a lot in this film was The Third Man, where there's a character who's off screen for most of the movie, and the hero has a very particular connection to them, and they're finding out things they don't want to know.
He's charming, the girl is in love with him, and then there's this little thing, and they don't even show the people, but he's been selling bad penicillin. And there's these kids who are twisted because they've gotten something instead of the drug that was saving.
They show it to Joseph Cotton, and we see his face
you see it on his
change.
face, So, and that's when he realizes it's not charming Orson Welles, it's this bad guy who has to be taken out.
But he has the luxury of just being friends with Harry Lime, whereas Bernice, it's her son, she can't even judge him.
In some cases, especially in Go for Sisters, the characters judge themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't need to. And really, a lot of the arc of the character is when they come to a judgment with themselves and they feel like, okay, I made the cut or I didn't.
Do you talk over that level of introspection with your actors, or you let them find that themselves?
I usually write a bio for all the actors, which is kind of, this is how you got here. This is who you two were to when you were, you could go for sisters back in high school. This is where you've been since. This is what your marriage was like. This is why you got into prison. This is what your relationship with this other, Chicano gang girl was while you were in prison. So they kind of know where they're coming from. And then, quite honestly, they play the moment.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing in movie acting is that you've read the script.
Yeah, you know where it's going.
How the scene ends when you start the scene.
You know your part in the overall structure of the story as well.
So what you want to do is you want to help the actors play the moment and only the moment, so they're not thinking about where is this leading.
Yeah.
But just be honest in that moment. And then if the screenplay is constructed well enough, when you put those moments together, it earns the ending. And the actors have done what you need them to do.
I'm fascinated by these biographies. How long and how detailed are these?
They're longer for the people with bigger parts, but even if you've got 2 lines, I tell you, who you are to your boss or whatever, even if you're...
Well, Isaiah Washington has an interesting character. He's very charismatic, but he only has one scene. We don't find out much about him. Like, what sort of things were in his biography, for example?
Basically, that he's a tough guy who can take care of himself, but he's the guy who owns the nightclub and he's not a criminal. Okay. Crime happens in his club. People do things in the bathroom that he knows about and everything. So he has to deal with the cops. He has to deal with the criminals. But he's not a criminal. And then, very specifically, he was married to Fontaine, the character that Yolanda Ross plays. Yeah. What was that relationship like? Why did he cut her loose? She got to be too much of a party girl. She started doing the drugs that everybody wants to do. He's a guy who knows the drugs are happening and he doesn't do them. Because he's got to keep his wits about him, and he's done that, But he's a pretty tough character, so he's one of those guys who can be on the scene without being swept away with it. So that might be 2 pages, 3 pages. Somebody else might get a small. Occasionally, it won't be just information. It will be something a little more impressionistic, a little more free associative.
Like how?
Well, I did a movie called Casa de los Babies, and. Marcia Gay Harden was in it, and she was playing a person who was kind of a sociopath. And so I wrote about 5 pages in her point of view, as if she was describing...
Like her internal monologue.
Yeah. So it was like a first-person monologue, just to say, this is what it's like inside your head. and this is your paranoia, and this is your that, you know, and I think it was better for her to know that than how many years you were married and all those other kinds.
Do you save all these things? Is there like
some of them I still have, you know,
yeah,
the actors often save them.
I bought a script of Lone Star when they published it, and you know, if there was something like that, I would have loved to have read it.
I wrote this book, Thinking in Pictures, that was about the making of Mate One, and some of those samples of those things are in that one. It's my only book that's has never gone out of publication. You know, they use it in film classes. And the University of Michigan is now archiving my stuff, which is great because the basement is empty. You know? And they're actually, you know, finding that stuff and putting it together, which I never did.
Was there anything that they found that you were just like, oh my God, I can't believe that's amazing?
Actually, before I sent things away, I found a couple things, you know, that I said, oh, that's cool. You know, I didn't know I'd saved that letter of, you know, we're sorry you're not available to work on, you know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever job I turned down. Or
Did you turn down Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
I think I was busy. I think I could do it.
Oh my God, yeah, that would have been awesome.
Yeah,
that would have been awesome.
And you know, I like the cartoon better than the movie, but you know, it would have been fun to work on. Yeah. But you know, one of the problems that people who study film history now are having is so much is done by email, and people just and it's gone. And you have to go to the National Security Agency to recover it because they've got it somewhere.
They owe us a favor, right?
Yeah, I know they've got it somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Getting back to the structure of it, you know, living the moment, but how the structure works. Your films are very well structured, if I may. And what I love about it is that oftentimes people focus on the overall structure of the film, you know, the sort of save the cat beats. But what you do that not a lot of screenwriters seem comfortable with is you often structure your scenes themselves in very specific beginning, middle, end. One thing I noticed, this is true in a lot in Lone Star in particular, where they often end with a sort of metaphor. Someone speaking a metaphor that sort of puts everything in context. And you have one here. Where you're talking about the kid's name is Orfeo, and they have a moment where they talk about Orpheus, the descent into hell, and then you're like, oh God, is that where this is going? Oh, this is going, and then you twist that around a bit. It's not. It has a. I don't want to ruin it. It has a slightly happier ending than Orpheus.
Yeah, well, I think that scenes really have to tell a story. Shots have to tell a story, and so there's always, you know, there are plot scenes that move the plot forward. There are character scenes that move the character forward, and there are things that seem like plot scenes that, you know, if you looked at it from just a plot point of view, you say, well, why is that there? We don't need that. But then you realize something is a reveal about the character within them. Right. There's a scene in this one where Edward Olmos's character, Detective Suarez, runs into this woman who is obviously with her little daughter about to try to cross the border. Right. And she's looking for her husband who's disappeared and everything like that. And he doesn't really, he gets one little bit of information in it. Actually, it's scrawled on the back of the breakfast check because he buys breakfast for the woman and her kid. And, you know, he could barely read it because he's going blind. But you could have found another way to do that. But really what the scene is about who he is and that he's not just doing it for money because this woman obviously doesn't have any money. And at some point he just says, here's my card. If you make it to the United States, you're still trying to find your husband, look me up. Yeah. And what that is that character, in his head, he's decided, maybe I could do this. Well, and it's not about money.
Yeah. Well, there's another bit in there it's even more of a fun and games version where Edward James Olmos has a monologue about how when he was young, his father encouraged him to be more American, and so he started a rock band called Freddie and the Debonaires, and that could be a fun bit just to liven up the character, and then that becomes a plot point because they have like the flyers that cover up the bullet holes.
And they've got to explain why is a Mexican American guy and two black women going to, you know, Tijuana, they're going to stand out.
Was that why that was in there? You were trying to figure out how to get them across the border?
But it all, you know, I mean, the first time he goes into the pawn shop, his brother-in-law says he makes a Tony Orlando joke. Now, most people who are of a certain age will get, oh, Tony Orlando and Dawn. You know, it was the you know, Hispanic guy and the two black women singing, and then, you know, the name of the group is Freddie Suarez and Ocean, and those two are Ocean. You know, so you know, it's, you know, called laying pipe. You try to go back sometimes and make it more organic, even if its original purpose was really just a plot purpose, which is, how are they going to, if their car gets shot up, how are they going to ride around Mexico with bullet holes in their car and not get pulled over for it. Well, what if they had something they could stick over it?
Yeah.
So, and they stick this, poster that they have made up very quickly of their singing group, which really doesn't exist, and then they get one of those Hecho en Mexico stickers that you see on everything, and they just stick it over the one through the windshield.